The camera never lies, but it doesn't always tell the whole truth. Madison Cooper's final routine played in slow motion across her memory. Perfect form, flawless execution, the crowd rising to their feet. 2.5 years later, she could still feel the chalk on her palms, still hear the silence before applause. What the cameras captured was poetry in motion. What they missed was the split second when 23 years of dreams shattered along with her spine. The equipment cable had simply snapped. No malice, no sabotage, just metal fatigue and terrible timing. In gymnastics, you learn that falling is part of flying. Madison just never learned how to get back up. Now at 29, she sat before her bathroom mirror in a cramped Portland apartment, applying concealer under eyes that had seen too many sleepless nights. The pale blue dress hung on her diminished frame like a whisper of the woman she used to be. Today marked a milestone she'd thought impossible, her first date since the accident. The mirror reflected a stranger, thin where she'd once been powerful, fragile where she'd been fearless. But her hands were steady as she applied lipstick, and her voice didn't waver as she practiced conversation starters. I work in graphic design. True. I love hiking. Used to be true. I'm between chapters right now. The truest thing of all. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Marcus Williams, 34, financial advisor, profile photo showcasing expensive dental work, and a gym membership he actually used. His message read, "Can't wait to meet the woman behind those beautiful photos." Madison had agonized over her dating profile for weeks. The pictures were all from the chest up, professional headshots from her brief modeling phase, casual selfies that implied mobility without confirming it. She'd told herself it wasn't dishonest, just strategic. She planned to explain in person, to let him see her as a person first before he saw the chair. Blue Moon Cafe sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a florist on Southeast Division. Madison had chosen it carefully. Wide doorways, accessible seating, the kind of warm lighting that made everyone look like the best version of themselves. She arrived 20 minutes early, navigating to a corner table with enough space to maneuver without drawing attention. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and possibility. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, while the late afternoon sun painted everything golden. At precisely 3 o'clock, the door chimed and Marcus Williams stepped inside. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Madison's monthly physical therapy bills. His eyes swept the cafe, found her by the window. She raised her hand in a small wave, tried for a confident smile. He started toward her table, expression pleasant, expectant. Then his gaze dropped to the wheelchair, to the footrest where her legs rested, unmoving, to the reality she'd hidden behind careful camera angles and strategic cropping. Something shifted in his face, not disgust exactly, but disappointment, like he'd ordered wine and been served water. "You didn't mention this in your profile," he said when he reached the table. His voice carried across the quiet cafe, drawing glances from nearby patrons. Madison felt her carefully practiced smile freeze. "I wanted to tell you in person." "Right." Marcus looked around, suddenly aware of the attention they'd attracted. A couple at the next table had stopped mid-conversation. The barista glanced over from behind the espresso machine, concern creasing her features. "Look, I'm sure you're nice," Marcus continued, already backing away. "But I don't do charity cases. This isn't what I signed up for. Good luck with everything." The words hit like physical blows. Madison's hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair as Marcus turned and walked out, the door chime marking his retreat like a funeral bell. The cafe fell completely silent. Madison could feel every eye on her, sympathetic, pitying, embarrassed on her behalf. She stared at the empty chair across from her, the chair she'd positioned carefully to make space for herself. Such a small, practical gesture that now felt humiliating. She'd made room for someone who'd never intended to stay. Her throat tightened. She would not cry here, not in front of all these strangers. She reached for her coffee cup, grateful to have something to anchor her in this moment of complete mortification. Then a small voice cut through the quiet like sunlight through storm clouds. "Daddy, why is that lady sad?" Madison looked up. A little girl stood a few feet away, maybe 6 years old, with dark curls escaping from carefully arranged pigtails and enormous brown eyes that held the brutal honesty of childhood. She wore a yellow dress scattered with daisies and clutched a well-loved stuffed rabbit under one arm. Behind her stood a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a well-tailored suit that somehow didn't look pretentious. His salt and pepper hair caught the afternoon light, and his expression registered first surprise, then something like recognition. "Emma," he said gently, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. "We shouldn't interrupt people." But Emma was already moving closer to Madison's table, her child's intuition cutting through adult politeness. "Are you sad because that man left? I saw him leave. That wasn't very nice." Madison managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, sweetie." "You don't look okay," Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who hadn't yet learned to lie politely. "You look like you're going to cry, but you're trying not to." The man stepped forward, and Madison caught something familiar in his features. A weathered kindness. Eyes that had seen their own share of loss. "I apologize," he said. "She hasn't quite mastered the concept of personal boundaries yet." "It's fine," Madison replied, though her voice sounded thin, even to her own ears. Emma looked up at her father with the expectant expression of a child who'd identified a problem that required adult intervention. "Can we help her? You always say we should help people who are sad." The man met Madison's eyes, and she saw something there. Not pity, but recognition. Like he understood something about what she was feeling, about sitting in public spaces and feeling exposed, about the weight of strangers' assumptions. "Would you mind if we joined you?" he asked. "Only if you want company. We can absolutely leave you alone if you prefer." Madison knew she should say no, should politely decline and will herself out of this cafe and this entire mortifying situation. But something about the way he asked, like her answer actually mattered, like she had agency in this moment, made her nod. "Sure," she said. "Why not?" The man pulled out the chair across from her, the same chair Marcus had rejected, and helped Emma into the seat beside him. The little girl immediately placed her stuffed rabbit on the table, positioning it to face Madison as if the toy needed to be part of the conversation. "I'm Daniel Brooks," he said. "This is Emma." "Madison Cooper." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "I like your dress. It's the color of the sky." Madison looked down at the pale blue fabric. "Thank you. I like yours too." "Mine has flowers. See?" Emma pointed at the daisies scattered across her yellow dress. "Daddy says flowers make everything better, but I don't think that's always true. Like when I'm really, really sad, flowers don't help. But Bunny helps." She held up the stuffed animal. Daniel smiled apologetically. "Emma has strong opinions about emotional support." For the first time since Marcus had walked out, Madison felt something other than humiliation, a small crack in the armor of her embarrassment, just big enough to let in a breath of air. "I don't have a bunny," Madison said to Emma, "but I think you might be right about flowers." Emma nodded solemnly, satisfied to have her worldview confirmed. Daniel caught Madison's eye, and there was something in his expression, warm, genuine, that made her think maybe this disaster of a day might not end in complete catastrophe after all. Daniel ordered hot chocolate for Emma and another coffee for Madison, waving away her protests about paying. As they settled into conversation, Madison found herself studying Daniel's face. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place where they might have met. He had the kind of eyes that had seen loss, the particular weariness that comes from loving someone and losing them. So, Daniel said after Emma had taken her first sip and gotten whipped cream on her nose, do you want to talk about what happened, or would you prefer we pretend we're just three people who randomly decided to share a table? Madison appreciated that he'd asked. Most people either pushed too hard or tiptoed around everything like she might shatter at any moment. The second option sounds good, she said. Emma wiped her nose with her napkin and looked at Daniel with the exasperated expression of someone far older than 6. Daddy works a lot. Like, a lot, a lot. Sometimes I forget what he looks like. Daniel laughed and the sound was warm, unguarded. That's a slight exaggeration. Is not. You work more than Tommy's dad, and he's a doctor who saves people's lives. What do you do that's more important than saving lives? Emma looked genuinely curious about this hierarchy of importance. I invest in companies, Daniel explained to Madison, as if apologizing for his career. Help businesses grow, not exactly life-saving work. Madison found herself relaxing slightly. There was something disarming about the way they talked to each other, the easy affection between father and daughter. It reminded her of something she'd lost, though she couldn't quite name what. What about you? Daniel asked. What do you do? The question landed heavier than he probably intended. What did she do? She used to be a gymnast, used to coach kids on weekends, used to have a life that made sense, that moved in clear trajectories toward specific goals. Now she did physical therapy 3 times a week and tried to figure out what came next. I'm between things right now, Madison said carefully, figuring out the next chapter. Emma perked up. Like a book. I love books. Daddy reads me stories every night. She paused thoughtfully. Well, almost every night. Sometimes he falls asleep first because he's old. I'm 37, Daniel said dryly, practically ancient. You have gray hair, Emma pointed out with the relentless honesty of childhood. 2 gray hairs. You've counted them multiple times. Despite everything, Madison smiled. The dynamic between them was pulling her out of the dark space she'd been sinking into ever since Marcus walked away. She took a sip of her coffee and realized the barista had made it exactly the way she liked it, even though she hadn't specified. Sometimes small kindnesses arrive when you least expected them. Daniel's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it and Madison caught a flicker of something. Responsibility, perhaps, or the weight of obligations calling. Work? She asked. Always, he said, silencing the phone without reading the full message. One of the companies I'm invested in is opening a new facility next month. There's apparently a crisis with the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Something clicked in Madison's memory. The Rehabilitation Center. The new Cascade Center in Portland. Daniel's eyebrows rose. You know about it. I did my rehab at the old Cascade location downtown, near the waterfront, Madison said, feeling something shift in her chest. They helped me a lot. I heard they were expanding, but I didn't realize it was already happening. We break ground in 3 weeks, Daniel said. The goal is to make it more accessible, more comprehensive. Better equipment, more staff, sliding scale fees, so cost isn't a barrier to treatment. Madison studied him. He didn't say it like he was bragging, just stating facts. But there was something in his voice when he talked about the center, a kind of conviction that surprised her. Why rehabilitation? She asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Emma had moved on to drawing on a napkin with crayons the barista had provided, humming softly to herself, lost in her own creative world. My wife, Daniel said finally, Emma's mother, she had multiple sclerosis. The rehab center downtown was where she went for treatment, where she learned to manage the symptoms as they progressed. The staff there gave her dignity when everything else was trying to take it away. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. Madison didn't ask. She didn't need to. Some silences carry their own explanations. She passed 2 years ago, Daniel added quietly. Since then, I've been trying to figure out how to make something good come from something so hard. The center expansion felt like a way to do that. Emma looked up from her drawing, as if sensing the shift in conversation. Mommy would like the new building. It has big windows and a garden. She would love it, Daniel agreed, his voice soft with memory. Madison felt her defenses lowering against her will. She'd assumed he was here out of pity, that he'd witnessed her humiliation, and decided to swoop in like some kind of savior. But maybe it was more complicated than that. Maybe he understood something about loss and rebuilding that most people didn't. I'm sorry, Madison said, about your wife. Daniel nodded his thanks. Then Emma pushed her napkin across the table with the solemn ceremony of someone presenting a masterpiece. I drew you a picture, she announced to Madison. It's you, but you have wings because sometimes people need to fly in different ways. Madison looked at the crayon drawing, a stick figure in a wheelchair with enormous purple wings sprouting from its back, reaching toward a yellow sun that took up half the page. Something in her throat tightened, but this time it wasn't from humiliation or grief. It was something else entirely, something that felt almost like hope. It's beautiful, she said, and meant it. 3 weeks later, Madison found herself doing something she'd thought impossible, looking forward to Thursday afternoons. What had started as an awkward encounter in a cafe had evolved into something neither she nor Daniel had quite planned. Coffee twice a week, sometimes with Emma chattering between them, sometimes just the two of them talking while Portland's autumn painted the world in shades of amber and rust. Daniel had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like interrogations. He wanted to know about her life before gymnastics, her childhood in Seattle, her parents who'd driven 4 hours to every competition, her favorite places she'd traveled. He listened like her answers mattered, like she was more than the sum of her injuries. In return, she learned about his world. The late-night phone calls from nervous entrepreneurs, Emma's increasingly creative excuses for staying up past bedtime, the way grief hit him at unexpected moments, in grocery store aisles, watching other families navigate ordinary Tuesday evenings, catching glimpses of couples growing old together. Caroline was the patient one, he told her over coffee one gray Thursday. Emma was at school, and the cafe felt different without her bright chatter filling the spaces between their words. She could spend hours explaining why the sky was blue or how caterpillars became butterflies. I'm more of a Google it parent. You're doing fine, Madison said, watching him worry his coffee cup between his hands. Emma's lucky to have you. Some days I feel like I'm failing her, like she needs things I don't know how to give. Madison had started keeping art supplies at Daniel's house for the afternoons when Emma wanted to create together, teaching the little girl how to shade with colored pencils, how to make figures look like they were moving across the page. It felt natural, like maybe she could have this kind of life after all. The Rehabilitation Center's grand opening arrived on a crisp October morning. Madison hadn't planned on attending, but when the invitation arrived in her email, she was on the mailing list from her time as a patient. She found herself clicking yes before she could overthink it. The new building was impressive, all glass and light, with ramps that felt intentional rather than apologetic, and doorways wide enough for 2 wheelchairs to pass comfortably. The garden Emma had mentioned stretched along the south side, raised beds at wheelchair height, pathways smooth and level, benches positioned for rest and reflection. Madison was examining the adaptive gym equipment when Emma's voice cut through the crowd. Madison, you came! The little girl ran over wearing a navy dress that was probably meant for special occasions, her father following at a more measured pace. Daniel looked slightly overwhelmed in his dark suit, like someone more comfortable behind the scenes than in front of cameras. You made it, he said, and his smile was genuine. I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure. The place looks incredible, Madison said, meaning it. Nothing like the old location. Better equipment, Better space, Daniel agreed. We tried to design it around what people actually need, not what looks good in promotional materials. After the brief ceremony, Daniel deflecting credit to the staff and designers with the discomfort of someone who preferred action to accolades, he found her in the occupational therapy wing, where she'd been studying the adaptive kitchen setup. "Can I buy you lunch?" he asked. "As a thank you for coming." They went to a restaurant downtown that Daniel promised had the best fio in Portland. He was right. They talked about books, about the city's changing neighborhoods, about everything except the obvious things. Madison found herself laughing at his stories about Emma's latest philosophical questions and elaborate plans for when she grew up. It wasn't until the check came that he changed everything. "I have to confess something," Daniel said, his hand stilling on his wallet. "When I saw you at the cafe that day, I recognized you. Not from before the accident, but from the rehabilitation center. I was visiting frequently when Caroline was being treated, and I remembered seeing you in the gym. You were working with the parallel bars, and the determination on your face stayed with me." Madison felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So you knew, when you came over to my table." "I knew you'd been through something difficult, yes," Daniel said carefully. "But that's not why I approached you. Emma decided we were going to help, and once she makes up her mind about something, there's no stopping her. I just followed my daughter's lead." Madison wanted to believe him, but the familiar weight of doubt pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I should go," she said, reaching for her bag. "Madison, wait." Daniel didn't move to stop her, but something in his voice made her pause. "I know what it's like to be seen as a tragedy. After Caroline died, people looked at me like I was this broken thing that needed fixing, like I was just the grieving widower, not a whole person. I hated it, so I'm not doing that to you." "Then why are you here?" "Because you make me feel less alone," Daniel said simply, "and I hope maybe I do the same for you." Over the next 6 weeks, Madison and Daniel fell into a rhythm that felt almost like normal life. Coffee dates, family dinners, where Emma insisted on setting a place for Madison. Quiet conversations after Emma had gone to bed about books and work, and the small betrayals of daily grief. Madison started to believe, started to trust, started to let herself imagine a future that included this warmth, this belonging. Then came the gallery opening. Daniel had invited her to a charity event featuring local artists, a fundraiser for arts programs in underserved communities. The gallery was beautiful, the art engaging, and Madison was actually enjoying herself when she overheard two women talking near the wine table. "That's Daniel Brooks," one said, gesturing discreetly toward where Daniel stood talking with the gallery owner. "The tech investor. Very successful." "I heard he's been dating someone," the other replied. "Apparently she's disabled, in a wheelchair." Madison's hand tightened on her armrest. "How noble of him," the first woman said, her tone dripping with something Madison couldn't quite name. "I suppose he's working through his grief by saving someone else. It's very philanthropic." "Like his rehabilitation center project," her friend agreed. "Everything's a mission with him now. Very touching, really." The words hit like ice water. Saving someone else. Project, mission, philanthropic. Madison found Daniel by the sculptures and told him she needed to leave. Outside on the sidewalk, the words came out sharper than she intended. "Is that what I am to you? Your redemption project? The woman in the wheelchair you get to save so you can feel better about not being able to save your wife?" Daniel looked like she'd physically struck him. "What are you talking about? I heard people talking about how noble you are, dating someone disabled, about how this is all part of your mission to rescue broken people." Madison's voice cracked. "I thought you understood. I thought you saw me as more than this chair. But maybe I'm just another center to build, another charity case to fix." "That's not true," Daniel's voice was raw. "Madison, you're not a project. You're not charity. You're someone who makes me laugh, someone who calls me out when I'm being ridiculous, someone who taught my daughter that strength comes in different forms. But that's just it, Madison said, tears threatening now. You see strength in my wheelchair. Everyone does now. Inspirational Madison. Brave Madison. Look how well she's coping. But I don't want to be your inspiration. I don't want to be the symbol of your healing. I just want to be a person someone chooses because they actually want me, not because I make them feel good about themselves. I do want you, Daniel said desperately, not because you're in a wheelchair, not in spite of it, because you're you. But Madison was already moving down the sidewalk, putting distance between them and the words she was afraid to believe. She could hear Daniel calling her name, but she didn't stop. Because if she stopped, she might start believing him, and that was more terrifying than being alone. Madison spent the next week avoiding Daniel's calls and messages. Her phone lit up regularly with his name, and each time she felt a stab of something between longing and terror. Emma had managed to send her own message, dictated through Daniel's phone, asking when Madison was coming over to finish the family of cloud rabbits they'd been drawing together. She threw herself into her sketches instead, drawing women with wheels instead of legs. Women who weren't apologizing for the space they took up or the accommodations they required. Women who moved through the world like they belonged there, because they did. Her best friend Sarah came over on Thursday evening, the day Madison would normally have been at the cafe with Daniel. Anne didn't say much at first, just sat on the couch while Madison worked at her drafting table. You know you're running, Sarah said finally. I'm protecting myself, Madison corrected. From what? From being someone's good deed, Sarah sighed. Madison, I love you, but you're being an idiot. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. His kid draws you pictures and saves them under her pillow. You're not his charity project. You're just scared. Madison didn't respond because Sarah was right, and that made it worse. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who waited patiently while Madison maneuvered to answer the door. It was a wooden box, carefully crafted, with her name carved into the lid in elegant script. Inside were 3 children's books, professionally printed and bound, with covers that made her breath catch. The illustrations were hers, the sketches she'd left at Daniel's house, transformed into something beautiful and permanent. The first book was called The Girl Who Found Her Wings. The second was Mountains Have No Rules, about a woman who climbed peaks on wheels because altitude didn't care how you got there. The third was Strength Wears Many Faces. At the bottom of the box was a letter in Daniel's careful handwriting. Madison, you once told Emma that flowers don't fix everything. You were right. These books won't fix anything either. But I wanted you to see what I see when I look at your art. Not inspiration for other people, but honest stories about navigating the world as it is while imagining it as it could be. Emma has been sleeping with the first book since I picked them up from the printer. She makes me read The Girl Who Found Her Wings every night. She says the girl in the story reminds her of someone brave she knows. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking you to know that you were never a project. You were always just Madison, the woman who taught my daughter that different doesn't mean less, who argued with me about coffee temperatures, who saw possibilities in my grief-stricken investment in a rehabilitation center that I didn't see myself. You didn't inspire me because you're in a wheelchair. You inspired me because you're brave enough to imagine something better than what we're told to accept. And that was always more than enough. Daniel P.S. I've established a scholarship fund in Caroline's name for young athletes with disabilities who want to pursue adaptive sports. The idea came from watching you work with Emma, seeing how you helped her understand that bodies work in different ways, and all of them have value. I thought you should know that your vision of the world is already changing lives. Madison sat on her apartment floor with the books spread around her and cried. Not bitter tears of humiliation, but something closer to relief. The kind that came when you'd been holding something too tight for too long and finally found the courage to let it go. She picked up her phone and stared at Daniel's number before typing, "You didn't fix me. You made me feel whole." The response came within seconds. "Coffee tomorrow? Just us. No audience, no assumptions, just two people who see each other clearly." Madison smiled through her tears. "Just two people. I'd like that." They met at Blue Moon Cafe the next afternoon. Madison arrived first, choosing a table in the middle of the room instead of tucked in the corner. She wasn't hiding anymore. Daniel walked in exactly on time. "I brought something," he said, sitting down and sliding a cup toward her. "I remembered you mentioned liking this once." It was a vanilla latte from the shop next door. Madison was touched that he'd remembered such a small detail. "Thank you. For the coffee and for the books." "Emma's been sleeping with hers," Daniel said. "She asked me why your drawings were just on paper when they should be in real books. I didn't have a good answer, so I found someone who could make it happen." Madison wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I'm sorry for what I said at the gallery, about you trying to save me." "You weren't entirely wrong," Daniel said quietly. "After Caroline died, I did throw myself into projects, the rehab center, work, anything that felt like forward motion. But Madison, you were never one of those projects. You were something else entirely." "What was I then?" Daniel took a breath. "You were the first person in 2 years who made me feel like maybe I could be more than just a father and a businessman going through the motions. You saw me as a whole person, not the grieving widower, not the generous philanthropist, just Daniel, the guy who drinks too much coffee and falls asleep during bedtime stories." Madison felt something in her chest crack open, like ice breaking up in spring. "I've spent 2.5 years waiting for people to see past the wheelchair, to see Madison instead of the disabled woman or the former athlete. And then when you did that, when you actually saw me, I panicked. Because if you really saw me and still chose me, then I couldn't blame the wheelchair anymore for why I was alone. I'd have to actually be vulnerable." "Vulnerability is terrifying," Daniel agreed. "So is this," Madison said, gesturing between them. "Whatever this is becoming, what do you want it to become?" "I want it to be real," she said finally. "Not you rescuing me, not me being your inspiration. Just two people who choose each other because they want to, not because they need to." Daniel reached across the table, his hand palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Madison placed her hand in his. "Just two people," he said. "I can do that." The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Madison had moments when the old fears crept back in. Daniel had days when grief for Caroline hit him unexpectedly. They learned to navigate these moments together, to give each other space while staying connected. Emma remained the unlikely architect of their relationship, insisting that Madison come to her 7th birthday party and declaring that no celebration was complete without all her favorite people present. The party was chaos and perfection. 12 7-year-olds running around the backyard, cakes smashed into faces, presents torn open with gleeful abandon. Madison found herself laughing more than she had in years. After the last guest had left, the three of them sat in the backyard under string lights. Emma was crashed on Daniel's lap, fighting sleep. "Best birthday ever," she mumbled. Emma lifted her head to look at Madison. "Next year you have to come again. Promise." "I promise," Madison said and meant it. After Daniel carried Emma inside to bed, he and Madison stayed in the backyard under the soft glow of the lights. "She loves you," Daniel said. "You know that, right?" "The feeling's mutual," Madison said. "She's an incredible kid." Daniel reached for Madison's hand. "I love you too," in case that wasn't clear. Madison's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I love you too. You and your bossy daughter and your terrible habit of leaving coffee cups on every surface in the house." Daniel laughed. "I'm a work in progress." Aren't we all? Madison said, squeezing his hand. 1 year later, Madison sat in the lobby of Portland Children's Hospital, waiting to meet Sophia Chen, the first recipient of the Caroline Brooks Scholarship for Young Athletes with Disabilities. The 8-year-old had been paralyzed in a gymnastics accident 3 months earlier, a story that hit Madison with painful familiarity. Sophia's parents looked exhausted in the way of people navigating a new reality they'd never imagined. When they saw Madison approach in her wheelchair, something shifted in their expressions. Not pity, but recognition. Hope, maybe. Sophia, her mother said gently, "This is Madison, the artist we told you about." Sophia was small for 8, with serious dark eyes and a gymnastics team t-shirt that had probably fit differently 3 months ago. She studied Madison with the intense curiosity of childhood. "You were a gymnast too?" Sophia asked. "I was," Madison said, settling her wheelchair at eye level with the hospital chair. "I loved it more than anything." "Do you miss it?" The question landed with startling directness. "Every day," Madison said honestly. "But I found other things I love too. Different things." She pulled out her tablet and showed Sophia some of her artwork. The flying figures, the mountain climbers, the women who move through the world with wheels and wings in equal measure. "They look strong," Sophia said, studying the images. "They are strong. Different kinds of strong than we used to be, but strong all the same." Sophia's mother was crying quietly, and her father kept clearing his throat. Madison remembered that particular grief, mourning a future that would never exist while trying to imagine one that could. "Can I show you something?" Madison asked Sophia, pulling up a video on her tablet. It was footage from a Paralympic gymnastics competition, athletes performing routines from their chairs, bodies moving with power and grace and fierce determination. Sophia watched with wide eyes. "They're flying," she whispered. "They are," Madison agreed, "in their own way." When Madison left the hospital an hour later, Sophia was drawing pictures of girls in wheelchairs with capes, and her parents were asking questions about adaptive sports programs and equipment funding. The scholarship would cover her needs for the next 2 years, but more than that, it would give her something to reach toward. That evening, Madison sat, she corrected herself with a smile, in front of a gallery full of people for the opening of Wings Don't Always Fly. The exhibition featured her illustrations, blown up and professionally framed, showing women in wheelchairs doing impossible things, flying through clouds, climbing mountains, dancing among stars. Daniel stood beside her, his hand warm against her back. Emma had positioned herself as unofficial gallery guide, leading people from piece to piece with the confidence of someone who'd watched each illustration develop from sketch to final product. "That one's my favorite," Emma told an elderly couple, pointing at an illustration of a woman in a wheelchair with wings made of pages from books. "Madison says books can help you fly even when your body can't." A young man in his 20s approached Madison, moving carefully on forearm crutches. "These are incredible," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you for making art that sees people like us as more than our limitations." Madison felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for coming." "My sister made me come," he admitted with a grin. "She's been following your work online. She said I needed to see it in person to understand what she meant about representation that doesn't feel like pity." She was right. The gallery opening stretched into evening. People came and went, many sharing their own stories of disability and adaptation and finding new ways to navigate the world. Madison talked until her voice was hoarse, but each conversation felt like planting seeds. Near the end of the night, Emma tugged on Madison's arm. "Can I show you something?" She led Madison to a piece near the back of the gallery, one Madison had almost not included. It showed a woman in a wheelchair sitting at a cafe table. No wings or impossible feats, just someone drinking coffee and looking peacefully out a window. "This one's my real favorite," Emma said quietly. Because she looks like you, and she looks happy. Not flying happy or climbing mountains happy, just regular happy. Madison looked at the illustration with fresh eyes. She'd drawn it on a difficult day, when grand gestures felt false, and she'd wanted to capture something simpler. The quiet contentment of being enough without needing to be extraordinary. You're right, Madison said. That might be my favorite too. Daniel joined them, slipping his arm around Madison's shoulders. The gallery owner approached with news that made Madison's heart skip. I've had an incredible response to your work tonight, the owner said. I'd love to discuss a permanent installation, perhaps a rotating display of disability-focused art with your pieces as the anchor. I think your vision could help us start important conversations. Madison looked around the gallery at her art on these walls, at the people who'd spent their evening engaging with her vision of the world. A year and a half ago, she'd been sitting in a cafe convinced that no one would choose her. Now she was here, chosen and choosing, creating and inspiring, building something meaningful. Tell her yes, Madison said. Later, they drove through Portland with the windows down and summer air warm on their faces. Emma chattered from the back seat about which prints she wanted for her room. All of them, she decided. We'll see, Daniel said diplomatically. After dropping Emma at her grandmother's house for a sleepover, Daniel and Madison found themselves alone in the quiet intimacy of evening. They drove past the cafe where everything started, toward a future that didn't require wings or impossible feats. Daniel reached for Madison's hand at a stoplight. I'm proud of you, for tonight, for all of it. Thank you, Madison said, for not giving up when I ran, when I was scared. You weren't running from me, Daniel said. You were running from the story you thought we were supposed to be, the one where I rescue you and you're grateful. I never wanted that story. What story did you want? Daniel smiled as the light changed. The one where two people meet on a terrible day and decide to make better days together. The one where a little girl asks her dad why a lady is sad, and somehow that question changes everything. This story, the real one. Madison squeezed his hand. I like this story too. They drove home through streets that had become familiar, past places that held their shared history, toward a house that smelled like coffee and art projects, and the particular kind of happiness that came from building a life together, one ordinary day at a time. Emma had been right from the beginning, Madison realized. Sometimes the best stories ended not with dramatic gestures or impossible achievements, but with happiness that didn't need to be earned or validated. Just happiness, pure and simple and utterly ordinary. Just two people who'd chosen each other again and again in all the moments that made a life. Just wings that worked perfectly fine exactly as they were.